We're now on the record. This is the videotape deposition of Rosalind Griffin, being taken on Friday, December 3rd, 2010. The time is now 9:02 and 30 seconds a.m. We are located at 31330 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills, Michigan. We're here in the matter of James William Fairley and Kim Fairley versus Schreiber Truck Company and Ray D. Kissick. This is case number 082759 NI. This matter is being held before the Honorable Thomas D. Wilson in the Circuit Court for the County of Jackson. My name is Mike Erlitis, video technician. Will the court reporter swear in the witness, and will the attorneys briefly identify themselves for the record, please?
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Robert Obringer on behalf of the defendants.
Steve Gursten, I'm here for Jim Fairley and Kim Fairley.
And you're Dr. Rosalind Griffin?
Yes, sir.
And what is your profession, doctor?
I'm a medical doctor, and I specialize in psychiatry.
And would you tell me a little bit about your practice? What is it that you do? And well, let me first ask this. We're at your office here on Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills, correct?
That's correct.
And is that where you conduct your practice?
Yes, it is.
And would you tell us a little bit about what that practice consists of?
My practice consists of treating patients, and I have a subspecialty in forensic psychiatry.
And what is forensic psychiatry?
Forensic psychiatry is that part of psychiatry that encounters legal issues and assists the courts with any legal decisions it might need.
I'll go a little bit through your background. You obtained your medical degree from the Wayne State School of Medicine in 1977.
Yes.
And then did you go on for further specialized training?
Yes, I did. At Sinai Hospital, I specialized in psychiatry and graduated from that program in 1982, became licensed to practice medicine and certified in psychiatry in 1982.
And have you been practicing psychiatry continuously since 1982?
Yes, I have, and in this office since 1993.
And the practice that you've conducted, has it been all here in the general Detroit metropolitan area?
Yes, it has.
And are you on the staffs of any of the local hospitals?
Yes, I am. I'm on the staff of Sinai Grace Hospital in Detroit and William Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak.
You talked a little bit about being certified in forensic psychiatry. Now, are you board certified in the general field of psychiatry?
Yes, I am board certified in the general field of psychiatry, which required me to sit for an examination and then subsequently have an oral examination in front of patients where two certified psychiatrists observe whether or not I can conduct an interview in psychiatry and neurology. And then after that, the results of the test come out, and those two, the oral and the testing, determine whether or not I've passed both, and I did. And I was certified at that point in general psychiatry.
And that point was?
1982.
Okay. And then you also spoke about forensic psychiatry. Mm-hmm. Are you board certified in that?
Yes, by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology.
Is that the same board that did your other one?
Yes.
Okay.
And that requires sitting for an examination as well, and then after passing that examination, which reviews 100 landmark cases in law and other practices of forensic psychiatry, then one is able to go on and become certified, and I was. I now sit as a board examiner for psychiatrists who want to become certified as psychiatrists.
So just like when you completed your residency and you were going through the tests, you had to be examined by other established psychiatrists.
Yes.
Now you're one of the psychiatrists who supervises the tests of the others.
That's correct.
Okay. And how long have you been doing that work?
I've been doing that work for several years, over the last decade. Mm-hmm.
And in, let's see, academic or university connections or appointments, what academic appointments?
I'm appointed to the faculty of Wayne State University as an assistant professor.
And what do you do in that capacity?
I conduct several courses, one in transition to private practice for the psychiatric residents, and those are the senior ones who are about to enter the field of work after their training is completed. Some go into fellowships and some go directly into private practice or clinical practice associated with the university or community mental health.
And in addition to serving or being on the hospital medical staffs, have you served or do you serve as a psychiatric consultant to various public agencies?
Yes, I do. I've served as consultant to New Center Community Mental Health Center in Detroit. It's a part of the community health care system throughout the state, but this one is located in Detroit. I've also, and continue to consult with Catholic Social Services and Northeast Guidance Center.
And just in looking at your resume, I see that for a period of time you were involved with working with deaf people. What was that?
That's an additional certification that I found myself interested in. I began studying deaf culture and went on to Medina University in Livonia and took several courses there and interpret for my church and for deaf patients. I have deaf patients in my private practice, and I am able to sign with them American Sign Language, and that remains an interest of mine and has gone on to help me develop a school for the deaf in Cape Town, South Africa, as well as Durban, South Africa.
And what are some of the professional societies to which you belong?
I belong to the American Psychiatric Association, the local Michigan State Medical Society, the local Medical Psychiatric Society, and I also belong to the Academy of Psychiatry and the Law and other psychiatric related associations, as well as the Wayne County Medical Society, where I serve on the peer review and the ethics committee of the Michigan Psychiatric Society.
And in reviewing your curriculum vitae as an attorney, it caught my eye that actually you have some connection with the state and attorneys. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, I was appointed by the Michigan Supreme Court, which is ratified by the Congress, that I serve on the Attorney Grievance Commission. This is a body that reviews complaints against attorneys and then determines if those are legitimate and then refers it to the Attorney Discipline Board. I also serve now on the Attorney Discipline Board, which sits in, it's sort of the prosecutory arm of the legal practice and determines what sentence or what kind of reprimand or discipline is directed toward attorneys who have broken certain rules of conduct.
And that also is by the appointment of the Michigan Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
And then for a certain period of time, you were appointed by Governor Engler to the Board of Regents at Eastern Michigan University.
Yes, sir.
How long did you, when and for how long did you serve in that capacity?
In the late 90s, early 2000, my recollection is that it was for at least to fulfill an unfulfilled term of a prior regent, which is the governing board of the university, to determine who the next president is, how the various committees work on campus, the unions, the faculty, the student body, and there we serve on those committees to make sure that they are meeting the expectations of the public as well as the educational system. And I served there for at least 2 terms, and each term is about 5 years.
And I see that you've also been appointed by the governor to, at times in the past, on various task forces on issues of social concern.
Yes, the race and gender bias was a very important committee that was to advise the governor and the Supreme Court on whether there was any discrimination that was being practiced in courts or by lawyers.
And I noticed something about the child abuse and neglect too.
Yes, I have been a lecturer for those groups who are interested in understanding how to detect child abuse. My familiarity with this began in my residency as a pediatric resident, and from there I became interested in advocating for child safety.
And are you called upon from time to time to give lectures or presentations?
Yes, most recently at Harvard University on campus there I lectured to women and discussed their issues with suffering.
And when you say most recently, when was that?
That was in November, around the 15th of November 2010, for about 3 days, the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th.
And your practice, does it include both adults and adolescents?
Yes, it does.
And in this case, at my request, you did an evaluation and a mental status examination of Mr. James Fairley.
That's correct.
Is this type of evaluation or mental status examination of persons whom you are not seeing for purposes of treatment, is that part of your private practice as well?
That is part of my private practice as well. It involves applying the tools of mental status that are part of the discipline of psychiatrists, the mental status examination, and those tools are used to assess whether the injuries are related to a certain event, employment, or an incident such as a motor vehicle accident or any other kind of precipitant that may be the perception of an individual, and determine if there are any objective findings that may be determined by a mental status examination.
Does it matter to you or affect your conclusions or impressions whether the party who's asking you to examine someone is the attorney or the party that's bringing the claim, or the attorney or the party that's defending the claim?
No, it doesn't matter.
Do you see individuals from both perspectives in your practice?
Oh, yes, I do, about equally for defense and plaintiff.
And you mentioned mental status examination, and if you could just briefly explain to me what it is. I'm not that familiar with what goes on, so when you refer to a mental status examination,
What do I mean by that?
Yeah, without getting, so I can follow it.
Okay, I'll make it real simple, and it's simple for me, and it's very much the tool of psychiatrists, in as much as we don't use a stethoscope or lay hands on a patient. We observe how a patient or a person is able to communicate. We look at their body posture, how they behave in the interview, whether their attitude is, consistent with cooperation or consistent with what is appropriate for an individual at a given time. We also observe whether they have appropriate judgment. We observe whether or not there's sadness or depression. We observe whether or not their body posture represents that, because someone may say, I'm very depressed by something, but they're showing a contradiction in that depression by being very upbeat and following the conversation. We look for whether or not there's problems with memory, concentration, comprehension. We also look whether there's disturbance in reality testing, such as psychosis, paranoia, hallucinations, whether visual or auditory. We look for suicidal signs, homicidal signs, impulse discontrol. We coordinate that with any medical findings, what might give rise to these sort of parameters of the mental status examination, where there's a review of systems, if that produces certain conditions that might cloud the person's memory or their affect. We also look at whether or not their age may determine certain things. Not being able to remember may be a part of the natural aging process. So all of those encompass the mental status examination. We're looking at the psychological, sociological, and biological functioning of an individual.
And I forgot to talk about money. Do you charge for these mental status examinations in this sort of litigation context where you see people?
Yes, it's customary and standard to have a retainer or charge for services rendered for conducting such an examination. And in my practice, it includes review of records, any legal consultations, the interview with the patient or the person who is a subject of usually a litigation, or though it may be related to other performances in their job or whether they're safe or not to be at the workplace, or fitness to perform certain duties. But in this instance, to also assess what the opinions may be about their functioning and put that in a report and submit it to the court or at the deposition.
And at least in this case, the charge was $4,500.
Yes, sir.
And then for the deposition, like we're doing today, you would make an additional charge.
That's correct.
And that charge includes meeting with me before the deposition or any other consultations that we would have.
Yes.
As well as the time here at the deposition.
Yes, sir.
And for that, your charge is $3,500.
Yes, it is.
Okay. How much time did you spend talking with Mr. Fairley?
At least 2 hours.
And I take it from what you said that this proceeds by talking with Mr. Fairley.
That's correct.
You don't have him get on a scale or tap his knee with a rubber hammer or anything like that.
None of that.
Okay. And the time that you spent talking with Mr. Fairley, are you satisfied that that was sufficient to reach the opinions and conclusions that you have?
Yes, it was.
And when you first started talking with Mr. Fairley, did you explain to him the nature of the interaction that was going to take place that day?
Oh, absolutely. It's responsible and appropriate to tell Mr. Fairley exactly what the purpose of this evaluation is, that it was not for treatment, which would be contradictory to a forensic evaluator's time and purpose. A forensic examiner does not treat the patient. That would be contradictory. And I told him that it would not be confidential, that what I found out during that evaluation may be put in a report, may be submitted to the court for trial testimony or even a deposition. And then I also explained that he's not held captive here. If he wants to take a break or needs to take a break, he's free to do that. And those are the three areas that are important to administer or discuss with any patient, so that they can discuss whether or not they want to proceed under those circumstances or they cooperate to go forward.
We'll go back over some of this, but did you, on the basis, you were provided with documents, actually by me, but you were provided with documents as well in connection with this evaluation.
Yes, to peruse them and consider them pertinent to my analysis.
And those would be, just to speed this up, the 12 items that you have listed in your report of the evaluation.
Yes. My report dated August 26, 2010 also includes my evaluation of Mr. Fairley that was done on June 7, 2010, and includes the review of 12 items of records that were submitted to me.
And my understanding is, although I wasn't here, was that the interview itself was videotaped.
Yes, it was.
And did you have the opportunity to review that videotape?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And I forgot to ask you, when was it that you met with Mr. Fairley?
I met with him June 7th, 2010.
And did you reach any conclusion as to whether, based on your evaluation, Mr. Fairley was suffering from depression?
There may have been a mood disorder related to a medical condition, which could be associated with his chronic illnesses of diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, obesity, and as a result, also perhaps chronic pain related to those conditions or perception that he has chronic pain.
And what do you mean by mood disorder? Is that the same thing as a depression, or does it include depression?
It includes depression, and it includes the fact that it's a mood associated with the patient's perception of his condition, as well as the objective findings of systemic illnesses such as diabetes, which over time can be a medical condition that associates itself with the mood of depression, and as well as the other systemic illnesses I mentioned, diabetes, hypertension. I mean, those are not fatal, of course, they can be managed, but chronicity of them over a long period of time may cause a person to be fatigued, have problems sleeping, that make them feel interested in certain activities, may add to their problems with sleeping. And then in this instance, Mr. Fairley also felt that his chronic pain may associate with the accident, may contribute to his condition of a mood disorder or depression in this instance.
Did Mr. Fairley say anything to you about whether he was improving or getting worse?
Oh, it's a good reaction, a good prognosis for him. He felt that he was improving, and by my observation, he looked to be certainly improving, which shows there's a positive prognosis for his continued improvement.
And I mean, how did he seem as a person to interview? Was he hostile or difficult or anything like that?
He was quite cooperative, and we established a rapport. He was quite straightforward, forthright in his responses. He was spontaneous in them. He didn't take a long time to answer questions, and he appeared to be showing perfect memory, absolute good concentration, no problems at all in his comprehension of my questions. And I observed no evidence of distortion of reality, no problems with his ability to interpret proverbs, ability to count, remember items, spell words backwards. All of those things are part of the evaluation that I conducted, and found him to be consistent with what he stated, that he was improving, and I felt that he would continue to improve.
Now, part of the records that you reviewed were the records of Dr. Wilanowski.
Yes.
And when you talked to Mr. Fairley, did you explore with him as to whether he was suicidal or feeling suicidal?
Oh, not at all. I did ask him that, and he had no plans or time frame to hurt himself or to hurt others.
But you did explore that with him?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And this was perhaps less than, I would say, this accident happened in April of 2008, so I saw him in June of 2010, and that would be roughly 2 years from the date of the accident that he's reporting he's continued to improve, and I expect that he would continue to improve.
And as part of you talked to Mr. Fairley about his general background and history, I mean, growing up, schooling, those sorts of things?
Yes, I did, and they're contained in my report.
All right. And was there anything about that general background that struck you as salient or unusual?
No, pretty much consistent with the activities that he presented, his ability to conduct himself nowadays, and that he had a quite fulfilling life, and that his marriage was beautiful and stable to him, and that he had supportive friends and family.
And then you asked him about his employment?
Yes.
And he explained to you that he had not been employed since the accident.
That's what he said, that's correct.
And what did he tell you the reason for that was?
He stated that the reason was because he had pain in the back of his head, and that he thought it was also due to a closed head injury or traumatic brain injury.
And was the pain in the back of his head or the back of his legs?
Back of his legs, I'm sorry.
And did you talk with Mr. Fairley about the details of the motor vehicle accident? Direct your attention to page 3 of your report, where it talks about the details of the accident as he recalled them.
Yes, if I can read from that. As regards to the motor vehicle accident, Mr. Fairley stated that he was driving a Honda Odyssey on his way to work when he was about to make a left turn and was clipped by a truck from the rear, and his car spun around and was hit from the rear again, and his vehicle flipped. And I go on to mention that what resulted from that. Mr. Fairley stated he was not drinking and he was seat belted. Mr. Fairley stated that he did not claim that he was trapped in the car. He did not feel that help was not on the way. He knew the police and ambulance were en route to treat him. He was put on a backboard, which did not frighten him.
Which did? It says...
Which did frighten him.
Okay.
He recalled that he was in and out of consciousness, and that the first thing that he recalled was being in the ambulance, where he was assured he was on his way to a hospital, Allegiance Hospital, also known as Foot Hospital. And it goes on to talk about his treatment.
All right. As far as his ability to be independent, what did Mr. Fairley tell you when you met with him?
When I met with him, he was able to drive, able to dress himself, clothe himself, feed himself, and that he drove in certain areas that were familiar to him, and when he wasn't in those familiar areas, he could use a GPS to help him. And those were the areas of functioning that he was able to comment on.
Did he say anything about being anxious when he's out in traffic or trucks around or anything?
Yeah,
like
he said he was afraid of trucks and that he had some anxiety associated with heavy stop-and-go traffic.
And did you ask Mr. Fairley about his medications, what he was on?
Yes,
I don't want to ask you to list all those, because by this time the jury will have heard his medications.
Yeah, he told me what his, in a review of his systems, when I asked about any chronic conditions, he told me he had hypertension, that he had diabetes, that he had problems with his arthritis, and that he had elevated triglycerides, and he had asthma. And I asked him for what was he being treated with, and he said certain medications. He also mentioned that he had been in physical therapy, and that currently he was enjoying and did go to the YMCA to swim several times a week, and he thought that was helping him, and he was improving. So the chronic conditions would be pre-existent to the accident, asthma and diabetes and hypertension, but currently we're being managed by medications and would continue to be managed and improve, my estimation, my projection for his continued living and quality of life.
And I guess as part of the history, you asked him about his social history or his family history. Was anything that he told you about that particularly significant?
Only that he remembered certain things, and he had a fair appreciation for his background. He was the youngest of 2 brothers, and his parents were deceased. He was able to talk about his mother dying of dementia after a stroke at age 82. That occurred in 2001. He also knew and was able to discuss his father's death, secondary to congestive heart failure. And he finished high school in 1972 in Jackson, attended some college at Jackson Community College before he went on to the factory. He denied prior criminal or history. He said his moving violation was some long time ago. He denied any childhood trauma such as rape or molestation.
And then you went on to do the mental status examination.
Yes, I did.
And what did you find out in the course of that? Describe it for me.
Sure. As stated in my report on page 6 is where it begins. I described Mr. Fairley as casually groomed and had a stiff and rigid gait. He sat comfortably on the couch, but did stretch at one point to loosen his muscles. He was cooperative. He gave his current weight and height. His appetite is different in that sometimes he forgets to eat, he stated. There was no prolonged reaction time to questions. He was quite spontaneous. As I would ask a question, he would answer it promptly and not figure out or delayed due to some memory problems. There was no evidence of that. He maintained good eye contact, showing that he was interested in the examination and able to be forthright about it instead of wandering his gaze and looking elsewhere for searching for questions or answers. He did not appear to have any confusion. He was articulate, had a normal rate and speed in his recollections of events. He showed no problems such as confusion or concentration or comprehension. He was able to recall details of the motor vehicle accident and treatment rendered thereafter. Mr. Fairley stated he had a bald head for a long time and he shaves his head every 2 weeks. He stated he had been treating with Dr. Wilanowski in 2010 after 3 or 4 sessions, but I believe that turned out to be an evaluation, not treatment. He stated that he had been given medication to treat his mood and appeared to be congruent with the blunted affect. He denied it.
What you missed? I'm not sure what congruent.
He stated.
I missed that.
Sure. He stated his mood, which he stated was depressed, and it appeared to be consistent with what I felt was a blunted affect. He didn't have a dramatic or theatrical or upbeat affect where he smiled and laughed or any of that. He appeared to be rather subdued, and in that regard I saw that he wasn't as effectively full, and that would be consistent with what he said that he was depressed. And he described himself as being in total pain from head to toe. After he arrived at the hospital, he was able to give sequential events such as being sedated in order to relieve the pain. Mr. Fairley had a perception that his memory problems were difficult based on using the microwave and cooking, and he makes notes to himself. But I found no evidence that these were ran over into his regular life or that it impaired his functioning in his regular life. So his performance there on certain tests were consistent with a person who was average to superior intellect, showing that he had a perception of his being more disabled, but his performance showed that he was operating on all cylinders, doing very well.
Was he able to demonstrate immediate and remote memory?
Yes, he was. And those were tested by saying, here's 3 items, can you repeat those items after 5 minutes or 10 minutes? And he was able to do just that, showing good memory. And he talked about watching TV, reading books, sports book, and is currently reading the biography of Ernie Harwell, a sportscaster who died sometime, a very famous sportscaster.
And was he able to recall a motor vehicle accident that he had in the 1980s?
He did, and he said at that accident he may have had whiplash.
Did he talk about having good days and bad days?
Yes, he did.
And what's lability of mood?
Lability of mood would be that he was up and down, having mood swings where he was very high, euphoric, elated, outgoing, and inappropriately outgoing, spending a lot of money and gambling or anything like that. And then the mood would swing to the other side where he's totally isolated, recluse, sort of a hermit, not interested in any activities, depressed, suicidal, and in those regards, perhaps isolated and not participating in any social activities, not going to work if it were given to him as a choice. So he didn't show any lability of moods in that regard, not in his history and not in the time that I saw him as well.
Is that a good thing?
That's a great thing.
Okay. And did he talk about how he felt at times now as compared to how he felt before the accident?
At times he stated he feels profound sadness, helplessness, and hopelessness compared to his former activities prior to the motor vehicle accident. That was his perception of himself.
Okay. And you have a category here for sensorium and mental grasp. What would you explain to me what that is?
That is the actual testing done in a mental status examination to see if there's any corroboration or correlation with what I observed and what is actually the objective findings on certain tests. And they may be asking what date is it, the time, the place, and who he is, his name, and he was able to give all of that. It may also ask his understanding of why he's here. He understood that he's launched a lawsuit alleging certain damages related to the motor vehicle accident, and he knew that that was the purpose of the exam. It also this tests for any problems related to someone's stability, whether he had problems.
Ability? I'm sorry.
Stability and ability. If he had a stable functioning in his life and ability to function at his own motivation to do certain things. He stated he has a fear of driving, and that physicians had ordered him to take a driver's certification program that he passed. But the conclusion of the mental status examination is contradictory to his statements because he performed very well on the exam. As I said, it tests memory, proverb, and abstraction, which is a rather sensitive test.
Let me ask you some questions about that a little more. So he indicated to you that he had problems sometimes being able to remember.
Yes.
And then when you put him through these various tests, was his performance consistent with his perception of how he thought he couldn't remember?
No, it was not. And part of it is already shown that the jury may be interested in. His whole history that he gave me would be a part of that memory testing. And that appeared to be rather rational and logical and sequential of information about his past history. Then current history, he was able to talk about that without any deficits or holes in his recall. And then at the time of the examination, there's a testing of information that is unrelated to his background and his functioning or his occupation that includes serial 7 subtractions from 100 or 2 subtractions from 20. You're able to count down by 2 from 20, 18, 16, 14, etc.
Did you have him do those
Yes,
ones?
I had
the
him.
serial 7s? Or?
Yes, I did. And he performed quite well on that. He knew the current headlines in the newspaper, which shows that his orientation is appropriate to the current setting of our existence today, newspapers, headlines, what might be in them. I think he was able to talk about the mobile oil spill, he called it, and tornadoes in Toledo. He was able to do the tap-tap exercise where he was able to follow my directions to tap when only I did 2 taps and to tap only when I did 2 taps. And if I did 1 tap, then he would not do any taps, which shows he's able to concentrate and follow directions. That's a rather simple test. He knew that his shadow was shortest at noon, which is quite unusual for some people. They think that it's shortest in the afternoon or late at night or early morning they might give. And the actual true fact is that your shadow is shortest at noon, and he knew that, showing an above average intelligence, I would say.
You asked him, did you ask him about who's the president?
Yes, I did, and he was able to name presidents in reverse order to Carter without any errors. He understood the symbolism of stars in the flag and how they represented the 50 states. He was able to spell the word sugar backwards. If he found a wallet with ID on the street, he would make sure it goes back to the person who owned it. And if he smelled smoke in a theater, what would he do? He would not yell fire, which is often a panic trigger, but that he would make sure that he started himself for the exit. And again, as I asked him to interpret the grass is greener proverb, he knew it without concreteness. So some people that would say, well, the grass is greener, rather than saying, what does it mean that this grass is greener on the other side? He was able to say, well, things look a little better from one perspective, but when you actually get there, it may be different. And so that's a normal response. And I gave him a difficult one because sometimes the grass is greener proverb or the glass house proverb, such as don't throw stones at a glass house, and why not? Someone might say it's concrete, it may break, but actually the abstraction is, take care of your own house. If you start criticizing somebody else, you might also be at fault. And I gave him a difficult one. It said, if to the dragons wading across shallow ponds have snails nipping at their heels. And to my surprise, he did quite well with that one. It's out of the norm for proverbs that are given, and he understood that it means even big people have problems, and he was able to interpret that appropriately. So I had enough information based on that testing that he was operating on all cylinders, doing quite well, and functioning, despite his perception that he had memory problems and all of those. They did not appear to be existent at the time of this exam. And I was able to make a certain conclusion from my testing and the history and my clinical observational skills.
And what conclusion did you arrive at with respect to his ability to remember things and his ability to think clearly?
I saw that there was absolutely no evidence of a closed head injury that affected his consciousness or physiological or psychological functioning. And I found that there was a mood disorder due to a general medical condition, which could be inclusive of his diabetes, hypertension, asthma, and also perhaps the chronic pain that he suffered. And these factors are a part of the diagnosis of psychological problems and a general medical condition.
Now, what's a prognosis?
My prognosis is what the future may hold for him, and I saw it as favorable, that he continued to improve, that despite his perceptions of himself being disabled or not being able to function, he was actually showing that he was able to function pretty much as general as anyone might do at his age and circumstance. He'd do quite well. And I had a favorable outlook that he would continue to do well. He was being treated, responding to that, compliant with medications. This is as much as you could hope for.
Did he tell you whether he was feeling more or less depressed and whether he was making progress?
He felt he was less depressed and making progress.
And did you assess Mr. Fairley's, you used the term character strengths and willingness, and how would that affect his prognosis for the future?
If he didn't have a willingness to improve, if, for instance, correlated with legal issues, he may have an increased or exaggeration of his symptoms for that purpose. In fact, there's a correlation of increased symptoms with legal issues, such as damages that he's seeking related to the incident. But if he decided that he wasn't motivated to do certain things and he wasn't able to pull himself to do that, then his prognosis would not be as favorable. But given his interest and able to demonstrate an ability and motivation, I felt that he'd be quite successful.
Did you feel that with his own character strengths and willingness to return to an active life, that was a favorable indication?
Yes, I did feel that.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Doctor, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Stephen Gursten. As I said, I'm here for Jim and Kim Fairley. Just so we're clear, all those different organizations you mentioned in the beginning when Mr. Obringer was asking you questions, none of those organizations asked you to do this one-time forensic evaluation of Mr. Fairley. It was actually the defendant in this lawsuit. True?
Those organizations are part of my CV, and the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law informs me about forensic evaluations.
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear with my question. I apologize. Who hired you to do this examination, ma'am?
Oh, I was retained by Mr. Obringer to evaluate Mr. Fairley.
Okay. And as part of your examination, you have on the last page your diagnoses and conclusions, and you have something that's called a GAF. Can you tell the jury what that is?
That is a global assessment of functioning.
And
It is a sort of a report card of how someone is functioning based on the examination and my diagnosis. That despite all of the individual ones, it's a multi-axial process. The first is any psychiatric conditions. The second is axis 2, personality problems. Axis 3, what medical problems. Axis 4, what psychosocial problems. Then axis 5, despite all of these, whatever they are, what is the assessment of his functioning? And it goes from 0 to 100, like a report card. 100 is doing very well. 70 is a C. 50 is showing some severe impairment. 40, 30, 20 would indicate the person is not doing well at all.
Well, 50 indicates they're not doing very well at all, too, correct?
50 represents serious symptoms of any serious impairment in social, occupational, and school functioning.
And 50 is what you gave Jim Fairley.
Yes, it is.
And in your code, you also diagnosed him with chronic pain disorder.
Yes.
And by definition, that means that the pain he is having is causing clinically significant distress or impairment in his social and occupational and other areas of functioning.
That's correct.
And by definition, it means that he is not malingering or exaggerating or faking.
That's correct.
And you do not believe that he is malingering or faking or exaggerating.
That's correct.
So just as an overview of your total conclusions based upon this one-time exam at the request of the defense attorneys in this case, you find no evidence of a closed head injury.
That's correct.
And the jury has heard the term closed head injury and traumatic brain injury intermittently. Is that the same thing to you?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Closed head injury and traumatic brain injury, it just depends on which doctor is using it, but they're all talking about injury to the brain.
That's correct.
And you found no evidence at all of traumatic brain injury.
That's true.
And you found no evidence of any abnormal memory or concentration.
That's correct.
No evidence at all in your exam.
That's correct.
And you found no evidence of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's correct. No post-traumatic stress disorder.
And you found no emotional injury at all, at least as it relates to him being hit by 2 trucks.
That's correct. I mentioned that if he had some depression, it may be related to the motor vehicle accident, but was responding to treatment and was limited at the time I saw him and showing remarkable signs of improvement.
And that was based also on the things that he was saying to you.
That's correct.
And you found no evidence of suicide.
That's right.
The depression that you find, you say in your report, is related to a general mood disorder.
Yes.
And by the general mood disorder, you're saying that that's due to medical conditions that you list in your Axis 3?
Yes.
And those medical conditions that you've listed in your Axis 3 are diabetes,
Yes.
elevated triglycerides,
Yes.
hypertension,
Yes.
asthma,
Yes.
obesity,
Yes.
and vertebral degenerative arthritis.
That's correct.
I did not leave anything out.
Chronic pain I also use in my Axis 1 diagnosis.
And so just so I'm clear, you feel that it is his diabetes, elevated triglycerides, hypertension, asthma, obesity, and vertebral degenerative arthritis in conjunction with the chronic pain therefrom that is causing his depression and chronic pain.
Well, just my objection only is that there's another entry there that says status post-motor vehicle accident under that Axis 3. So,
I think that's improper, Bob. And
Okay.
I think that's an improper way to object. That's a speaking objection.
well,
So,
no, it's an objection to your question because you left it out of your question.
I have too much respect for you to argue with you, so I'll just note that I think that's an improper objection. I'll cite the Hall v. Clifton precision case, and I'll just ask that you just restrain your objections to something that perhaps is not a speaking objection in the future. Would you read back my question, please?
And just so I'm clear, you feel that it is his diabetes, elevated triglycerides, hypertension, asthma, obesity, and vertebral degenerative arthritis in conjunction with the chronic pain therefrom that is causing his depression and chronic pain.
Objection before.
You may answer, doctor.
I think I did already.
Would you answer again, please?
Okay, again, I see that these conditions, status post-motor vehicle accident, and including the diagnosis I made in Axis 1, are related to his mood disorder.
So how much of this is related to the motor vehicle accident, and how much of it is related to these general medical conditions?
Well, I explained that these are flowing from the motor vehicle accident.
So when you say that he is now seriously impaired in his global assessment of functioning, and the GAF defines it as seriously impaired in his social and occupational functioning, you also feel that that is from the motor vehicle accident as well?
I feel that that plus the other medical conditions contribute to his severe impairment.
The other general medical conditions that you list, did you list those in order of severity?
No.
How did you arrive at this disorder, at this order of general medical conditions?
It's a compilation of all the conditions he gave, his review of medical systems that he produced for me.
So diabetes was put first for what reason?
It was just listed first.
Okay. So there's no significance to being listed first?
No.
And you're saying that he told you he has diabetes?
Yes. And the medications he takes for it.
He did not deny having diabetes?
That's correct.
Can you tell me how, did he tell you he had elevated triglycerides?
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay. Is he taking medication for that?
I'm not sure that I saw that in his review of medications.
Okay. Can you tell me how elevated triglycerides would be contributing to his chronic pain?
Well, he has elevated cholesterol, and he's obese, and those conditions together can produce the diabetes that he has, and his family history of congestive heart failure would indicate that he's at high risk for those. And so I saw them as significant, and I listed them here.
Okay, but how does elevated triglycerides contribute to chronic pain?
I don't have a connection for that. Mr. Fairley said that he had chronic pain from head to toe, and that encompasses a number of contributing factors to his chronic pain: his arthritis, his asthma, his hypertension, blood flow as a result of diabetes might constrict some of his, arterioles and his muscular functioning.
Do you have evidence that he had diabetes before this truck crash?
No, I don't, but diabetes is not a sudden onset. It's a chronic pre-existent condition that Mr. Fairley stated he had.
Do you have any evidence that he had either diabetes or any possible precursor that could lead to diabetes at all before this double truck crash?
No.
And do you have any evidence that he has diabetes today?
Only his statement, his history that he provided to me.
Are you aware that we took the trial deposition of his family doctor 2 days ago, who
No.
indicated that there is absolutely no evidence that Mr. Fairley has diabetes?
No, I'm not aware.
Okay. So going back to his elevated triglycerides, how did you learn about that again?
From Mr. Fairley?
And assuming that he does have it and it is being controlled by medication, how does this contribute to either his depression or his chronic pain?
It would contribute to what I consider to be a high risk for his heart functioning, contributory to whether his diabetes is regulated, if his family physician, medical information his producer says he doesn't have those conditions, and I'm happy for him. But as I can see them now, triglycerides would be a contributory factor to his functioning, and I saw that as significant.
Okay, but help me, because that's where I'm getting confused. How is it contributing to his functioning right now?
It's a factor that he offered as part of his medical background, medical history.
Okay, but does elevated triglycerides cause pain?
Not to my understanding.
Does elevated triglycerides cause depression?
Not to my understanding.
Next, you have hypertension. Where did you learn that he has hypertension?
From Mr. Fairley.
And do you have any records or evidence as to how long he's had hypertension?
No, I don't.
Can you point to any evidence that he had hypertension before the injuries he suffered in this double truck crash?
No, I have no medical records prior to the motor vehicle accident.
You were not provided with any medical records from before this by defense counsel?
I have no medical records prior to the motor vehicle accident.
Are you aware that when we took the trial deposition of the family doctor, he indicated that Mr. Fairley never had any issues with hypertension before this truck crash?
No, I'm not aware.
You are aware, however, that pain, especially severe pain, can elevate blood pressure and cause hypertension.
That's chronic pain, yes.
Okay. Next, you list in your list here, you have asthma. Where did you learn he had asthma?
Mr. Fairley produced that information for me, and it's part of the multi-axial diagnostic order of making a psychiatric diagnosis. It's the multi-prong, or 5 different areas that one must mention when you're making a psychiatric diagnosis. The Axis 1, as I said, is a clinical psychiatric disorder. Axis 2 includes the personality traits. And Axis 3, without listing a priority, is inclusive of all medical conditions currently contributing to Mr. Fairley's stability or disability or impairment.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is how is asthma contributing to his depression or his chronic pain?
Well, it's taken into consideration that part of his dysfunction or impairment is not from one sole source, that these all must be considered as part of his condition.
Dr. Griffin, are you aware that he does not have asthma?
No, I'm not.
Can you point to any medical records in your possession that say he has asthma?
No.
And you weren't provided with the records from his family doctor from before this, but I'd like you to assume the family doctor records indicate that he's had no problems with asthma before this truck crash. So we can say that asthma is certainly not contributing to any of these chronic pain syndrome or depressive symptoms he's having if he doesn't have it.
That's not the intent. It's to list what medical conditions he has, and that's what I did on Axis 3.
But where did you get that he has asthma from?
From Mr. Fairley.
You're sure?
I am sure.
Next, you have obesity. Was he obese before this truck crash?
I have no records of Mr. Fairley's condition before the motor vehicle accident.
But, doctor, I'm asking if you know if he was considered obese before the injuries from the truck crash.
I have no records of his condition before the motor vehicle accident.
I'm just asking if you know if there's any records you have in your possession today, or if there's any source of information that you have in your possession today that would suggest that Mr. Fairley was obese before the injuries he suffered in this double truck accident.
I have no records before his motor vehicle accident.
Your last and final finding on axis 3 is vertebral degenerative arthritis. Is that correct, doctor?
Yes.
And I stated that correctly. It's called vertebral degenerative arthritis.
Yes.
What is that referring to?
That's referring to his osteoarthritis that was existent at the time of the motor vehicle accident and subsequently continues to be his diagnosis, osteoarthritis.
Okay, where do you see in any of the medical records in this case the words osteoarthritis?
I saw them in the records. I'm not able to point to them now.
Whose records, doctor?
Mr. Fairley's records.
From what doctor?
I'm not sure, but it's cited in his medical records.
Are you absolutely sure?
I'm sure.
Maybe we can take a break shortly and you can try and find that for us. My question is well, actually, one of the records you were provided with was the trial deposition of his neurosurgeon, Dr. Rawal.
Yes.
Correct? So, how is it that Dr. Rawal is saying that Mr. Fairley comes within a couple millimeters of being paralyzed and that his T12 vertebral body is so badly fractured and collapsed? How is it you're calling that vertebral degenerative arthritis?
Well, I associate that with the findings that Dr. Rawal saw, and that the condition has certainly not caused him to have spinal root or paralysis, and is limited and controlled and fixed and repaired.
I'm sorry, can you read that back to me, the last answer?
Well, I associate that with the findings that Dr. Rawal saw, and that the condition is certainly not causing him to have spinal root or paralysis, is limited and controlled and fixed and repaired.
Okay, what evidence do you have from anywhere in this case that this is limited or repaired or improving?
Mr. Fairley's presentation shows that he's not paralyzed, shows that he is not dysfunctional in that regard. He had a stiff gait, and that's how he presented as he walked in. But I did not see that he was showing any kind of immobility.
In any of the medical records that defense counsel provided to you, do they indicate that this condition is improving?
Mr. Fairley's statement was that he has improved, and his statement also that he continues to go to the Y and swim 3 times a week is consistent with an improved state.
Okay, but I was asking you about all the medical records that have been given to you by the doctors that are treating him for his physical injuries and his fractured vertebral body and his chronic pain. Do you see any indications of improvement there?
I saw from Mr. Fairley that he has continued to improve, and that's his own statement, and I agree with that.
Doctor, we'll go on, and I don't mean to. I just would like an answer to my question. In any of the medical records from the specialists who are treating him for these injuries, do any of them indicate anything consistent with the statements you've just made?
Objection to the form of the question.
That he's improving?
I certainly would help you understand that my role in this was to look at whatever condition he may allege or whatever conditions other medical providers may give, that his emotional injuries are certainly not inclusive of a post-traumatic disorder and not inclusive of a continuing disabling emotional disorder, and that from my standpoint as a psychiatric expert, he showed no problems with his emotional state, and the treatment has been successful and he continues to improve. There's been no plateau in that. He continually improves his psychological, sociological, and biological functioning.
How do you know that?
I have an expertise that is able to detect whether someone is depressed or not and whether they're resolving in those symptoms, and I saw Mr. Fairley as being that person with good luck that he was improving.
Okay, so with the exception of the statement that you say he made to you that he is improving, and with the exception of your one-time examination, are there any records, including the trial depositions that defense counsel has provided to you for you to review, that indicate anything consistent with with the statements you have just made that he is improving and his physical injuries are getting better?
I'm the expert in looking at his psychological functioning, and that's my limited dealing with Mr. Fairley. I can only go by what his statement was, that he is improving and continues to improve psychiatrically.
Okay, well, I guess my question though is, in all the medical records you've been provided, are you aware of any doctor, out of all the specialists who've been treating him for his back injuries and spinal injuries, who call these vertebral disc fractures vertebral degenerative arthritis like you did?
I list them in my Axis 3 diagnoses, and I'm redirecting you to look at my expertise in making a psychiatric diagnosis. I'm
I
not
understand
dealing
that,
with his
doctor.
physical condition and other medical specialists that may, be produced prior to this time or at trial. So my expertise is in that area of his psychiatric or emotional injuries. And in
Doctor,
that
can you answer
regard,
my
I'm saying
question?
he's improving.
Can you answer my question, please?
I can't
Objection.
answer.
I believe that it has been asked and answered.
I can't answer it any further. I've done my best, and that's
Okay.
as much as I can do.
So my question is very specific, and perhaps you could just answer it with a yes or a no. Are you aware of any doctor anywhere in this case, of the 40 medical specialists that have provided care to him over the last 2.5, almost 3 years, that have called his physical injuries to his back and his spine what you did when you referred to it as vertebral degenerative arthritis? Are you aware of any doctor that has used those words?
I cannot answer your question as stated.
The vertebral degenerative arthritis, if we put that aside, is there a reason that you did not include any of his other injuries from this double truck accident?
Well, I saw the records, and I imagine that there may be additional medical records that would be consistent with my perusal of certain documents. But again, my addressing those physical conditions is not my expertise, but only to list them as offered by Mr. Fairley. And I concentrated on my area of expertise, which is to look at him psychiatrically and emotionally.
I understand that's what you're saying, doctor. I guess my question is, you've listed diabetes that he doesn't have, elevated triglycerides that is not symptomatic, asthma that he doesn't have, obesity that I don't believe there's any evidence of before this double truck crash, but you don't list anything about traumatic headaches, tinnitus and ringing in the ears, the fractures he has sustained to other areas of his body, to his mouth, his shoulder, his knee injury, any of these other injuries from this crash. I'm wondering why those are omitted from your Axis 3 listing of injuries and conditions.
And your question is?
Why are they not listed?
I didn't feel that they were pertinent to my analysis.
Okay. I'm confused, so please help me to understand. How is diabetes, elevated triglycerides, hypertension, and asthma and obesity pertinent to your diagnosis and conclusions, but the other physical injuries that he is seeking medical attention for the past 2.5, almost 3 years, and taking narcotic medication for every day, not pertinent?
Asked and answered.
I can't help you further.
You can't answer that?
I cannot help you further as you requested. Help you understand. I've said as much as I can on that subject.
Would you agree that something like traumatic headaches, where he's taking 3 Darvocets a day to control them, might be more pertinent than listing something like diabetes or asthma or obesity that he doesn't even have, or hypertension that he never had before this, and elevated triglycerides that, if he does have, is not symptomatic.
Objection, form, and foundation.
Doctor,
I'm not sure of your question.
would you read it back, please?
Would you agree that something like traumatic headaches, where he's taken 3 Darvocets a day to control them, might be more pertinent than listing something like diabetes or asthma or obesity that he doesn't even have, or hypertension that he never had before this, and elevated triglycerides that, if he does have, is not symptomatic?
No.
It's not more pertinent to your conclusions and diagnosis?
No, I've already addressed that in my Axis 1 diagnosis, which is chronic pain. So I have addressed it.
So if I understood your testimony earlier, where I believe you said on more than one occasion his chronic pain is related, in fact, this is what you said, his chronic pain and mood disorder is related to his general medical condition. His chronic pain is related to these illnesses. You're saying that the chronic pain he has, including the traumatic headaches, that you now say is incorporated in the chronic pain disorder diagnosis you list in Axis 1, that those things he's having, like traumatic headaches and chronic pain, is related to the general mood condition that you went on to list in Axis 3 as the cause of his depression.
Well, it includes the chronic pain. Whatever contributes to his chronic pain, I am admitting that as it flows from the motor vehicle accident, it may have a contributory factor in his mood. But I also mentioned that he is responding to treatment, and that has very promising outlook that he will continue to respond, and it's being managed.
But that seems to be only based upon your exam and what you say Mr. Fairley said to you. True?
That's what an expert witness does.
I see. So I'm trying to understand, because my copy of the DSM-4 that defines chronic pain disorder says that when you use that diagnosis, when you diagnose someone with that, that means that number one, the pain is the predominant focus, and number two, it is severe enough to warrant clinical attention.
That's correct.
Okay. So looking now at all of the things that you listed in Axis 3, his diabetes, elevated triglycerides, hypertension, asthma, obesity, and the vertebral degenerative arthritis. Do any of those conditions cause pain?
Well, the chronic pain that I list in Axis 1, that you just clarified by your definition, addresses your concern about your understanding of what chronic pain means.
Okay, but you said in your report and in your testimony on more than one occasion that his chronic pain and his depression is related to the mood disorder, which is related to his general medical conditions.
That's correct.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, how do any of these general medical conditions cause him pain? With the exception perhaps of the hypertension, which can be caused by someone who's undergoing and experiencing severe pain.
I can't help you understand it better. You've stated it correctly earlier, and that's as good as I can do. He has chronic pain that needs treatment and attention, and chronic pain is the number one priority in addressing his complaints.
So when I asked you in the very beginning of my questioning that you found no evidence at all of any emotional injury from this double truck crash, you're saying that the depression he has is related to these Axis 3 conditions, these general medical conditions that you listed.
I think I've been clear that he has chronic pain that I've addressed in Axis 1. So I've covered pretty much every diagnosis that relates to the motor vehicle accident and his current functioning.
Okay. So when you say he is depressed, is he depressed also because of this motor vehicle crash?
That's possible.
Is it possible or is it probable?
It's possible.
Why isn't it more probable that he is depressed from serious physical injuries from a motor vehicle crash and the constant pain he's had for 2.5 years, as well as all the things he can't do, like go back to work, then access 3 conditions like diabetes and asthma that he doesn't even have.
Your question is rather confusing. I don't know which part to answer. He
Why
can
isn't-
work.
why
he
isn't-
can work, and he refuses to go back to his other employment, and I can understand why he cannot. But he is employable, and he has chronic pain, and it may have flowed from the motor vehicle accident, but it's being addressed with medication, and I see that as promising that he's able to address those things and be managed by it.
You feel he's able to go back to his job?
No, I said he cannot go back to his job, but he is employable.
Doing what?
Well, he could be a security guard. He could sit down and watch video of certain kinds of movings and goings on in an area that requires observation and surveillance. He could be a receptionist, where he's not demanding any physical movement, but I'm sure he could manage that. He has a great intelligence, memory, responsibilities for certain things. I think he'd do well if he were motivated and interested.
You don't feel he's motivated and interested?
If he was motivated and interested in performing employment, then he could pursue those avenues. And not having sought those or failed at it, I can only hope that he would entertain those if he were interested in working. If he were interested in working.
So you feel the reason he's not working any of these other jobs is not because of any of his injuries, but because he's not interested in it?
If he were interested in those other areas, I would feel that he'd be quite successful.
Doctor, can you, I just want to get back to this depression being possible from the motor vehicle accident, but not probable. Can you explain to us why, well, let me ask you this. As a medical doctor, as a psychiatrist, you're supposed to pick the most likely cause for someone's symptoms, aren't you? Not the least likely?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any evidence of him functioning at anything other than a very, very high level before this crash that we're here for, before the effects on his life?
I have no medical records prior to his motor vehicle accident.
Okay. Do you have any evidence from his history to you, or all the depositions and medical records that have been provided to you of him functioning at anything other than a very high functioning level before he's hit by 2 trucks on April 4th, 2008?
Well, I know that he had a motor vehicle accident in the early 80s where he stated he had a whiplash.
Okay, that was 30 years ago. Anything besides 30 years ago where he may have had a whiplash?
Well, I might suggest that that could be possible. Maybe it came from that accident, that he has some conditions now. That's about all according to his history. But according to his history, only that I can see could be contributory to his current functioning. And I have no other medical records to corroborate that. But he offered it that he did have a motor vehicle accident before. So some of the conditions may be related to that and some to this. I'm not able to determine how much one or the other.
But he has shattered, collapsed vertebral bodies in his back. Are you saying that is... And he worked for 24 straight years, including 12 years without ever missing a day from work. Mm-hmm. You're saying that this whiplash he may have had 30 years ago was a contributing cause?
I don't know.
Okay. Are you aware of any other possible contributing cause besides him getting hit by 2 trucks?
I see that as contributory, certainly, a dramatic contribution.
Okay. So back to my question, do you have any evidence to the contrary that he is functioning at anything other than a very high level until this truck crash on 4/4/08?
I've answered that. I sure have answered a couple times. I don't know what more you want from me.
I want to know if you have any evidence.
You know that I have no records prior to his motor vehicle accident. I've said that.
Let's change the tape.
This marks the end of tape number 1. The time is 10:22 and 12 seconds a.m. You're now off the record.